What's up, everybody? Coach Mills here, coming at you with a brand new Overwatch video. And in this video, we're going to be breaking down 5 perfect playstyles to absolutely dominate. Because every single player has their own strengths and weaknesses, and I'm going to help you match up your strengths with a specific playstyle that you can use to abuse your enemies again and again and carry and climb as a result. Now, the first type of playstyle is for those of you who just love to flex. And I'm not talking about you Tyler 1 looking motherfuckers. I'm talking about those of you who are very, very comfortable on a lot of different characters. You've been playing the game a long time. You've played a wide range of different characters. So being able to flex is one of your most valuable skills. And you might not be the best individually on one character, but you're pretty good at many different characters. This is the perma counter pick strategy, and this is what you do. You basically find a threat on the enemy team and you counter pick them, and you pick the hardest counter possible. Now, it's best if you actually know characters that are very, very hard counters to certain other characters. For instance, a character like Widowmaker is a really hard counter to something like Pharah. Or a character like Sombra is a counter pick to a lot of different characters, just like a character like Reaper is a counter pick to a lot of different characters. So learning these characters that have a lot of different big counters is probably what you want to have with this strategy. But essentially what you're doing is you're trying to constantly counter pick an enemy and keep on forcing them out and out and out until they are in their uncomfort zone, right? And because you're so flexible, you are always going to be pretty competent at whatever characters you're playing, and because you're going to be far more flexible than your enemies, who typically will only be good at 1 or 2 characters, you're going to be able to put them on a character that they're just playing really bad at, and that's a way that you can systematically shift the enemy composition into your favor and take threats that are just dominating your team, whether it's a Doomfist or a Genji or a Widowmaker, and force the enemy to get off those characters and play characters that are a lot more easy for you and your team to manage overall. This can be a very, very powerful strategy, and it's something that a lot of you, I know, you Game Leap subscribers can really make use of more than most people. Then the next type of playstyle that you can use to dominate, that some of you have a natural tendency towards, it's the W key, the aggressive player, right? But one of the problems with being aggressive is it's unbridled, and yes, being really aggressive can work if you have your teammates go in with you, right? But a lot of times in ranked, they're not going to. And if you're too aggressive, you're just going to get caught out. So what should you do, actually, as an aggressive player to still be proactive, but not to the point where you're feeding and not getting a lot of value? Well, what I would highly suggest you do is the poke and prod. Basically, you are trying to poke the bear and seeing what you can get away with. How does the enemy react for you taking an off angle, for example? How long does it take them to react? Learn these things. How much pressure can you put on the enemy, and how quickly do they respond to said pressure in what way? Basically, you are trying to get a read on the enemy by putting out some outward pressure and seeing how they respond and making a game plan around that. Now, a lot of times when you're playing pretty much any character, let's say you're a Roadhog and there's an enemy that is keeping you in check, an enemy Ana that you're always aware of, you should track your problematic characters that are really preventing you from just unleashing your true aggression, and then center your engages around them. When they are overworked, like they are extremely busy with other things, when they get picked, or you set up a situation where you can either pick them or wrap around away from their effective ranges, that is when you can truly access your engages and have really clean, aggressive plays that still play around some of these really problematic characters. You see it all the time with the Tracer that is hyper cognizant of where the McCree is, but the second that McCree steps a little bit too far away to help the Zen, she's on that Zen just like white on rice. And that's exactly what you can do as an aggressive player. You are poking, putting pressure here and there, sometimes even baiting people to go where you want them to, and then targeting characters based on where and when the problematic character steps out of line. Now we go to the next type of playstyle that you can use to dominate your games, and it's the brain. And this is when you're just trying to outwit your enemies. And typically, this is done in the player select screen a lot of times. This is weaknesses that you can exploit in an entire team composition. You see the enemy team doesn't have a defensive ultimate. Having a solid combo like Grab Dragon can just win that team fight. And maybe you can't control every aspect of your team, right? But if you're a tank, you can play Zarya. And if you're a DPS, you can play a number of DPS that can really abuse an enemy team that doesn't have a defensive ult. On top of that, you could think about what the enemy team is just doing wrong that you could punish on paper, or switch to a playstyle that you can really utilize to exploit the enemy team. So, for example, they keep diving in. Maybe you're playing Farmer Reserved, you're sandbagging your abilities, and you're going to use them all at once when the enemy jump on top of you, trying to burst down a target. That could be something that you think about ahead of time, and you actually do to just straight up win a team fight, because the enemy is going to feed into you because you're literally playing around that specific action. Another huge aspect of this is potentially thinking about enemy ultimates and trying to figure out a way to stop whatever the enemy team's win condition is on the fly. A perfect example of this would be, let's say you're playing Hanamura on defense as a support. The enemy rolls through that first point and wins it, and the enemy has a Genji and an Ana, and you know that they have Nanoblade because they didn't use it. Well, maybe at the time you were Zenyatta and you have like 40% of your ultimate, right? You're not going to do anything on Zenyatta to stop that, so you go into spawn and you pick up a Baptiste. Now you're going to sandbag that immortality field into the last possible second, barely keep your teammates alive, and you counter that ultimate. You can only do that through ult tracking, premeditation, and then execution, all using your brain to get direct value and win a team fight that, in many other situations, you would have just gotten rolled with no way to counter that at all, especially if you would have stayed Zenyatta. Now, the next type of playstyle that you can actually incorporate to dominate, if this is your predominant style, it's the passive player. And a lot of times, passive players get into a bad habit where they're not really doing anything. They're just kind of going through the motions. But that's not what I mean by being a passive player. What you need to be doing as a passive player is putting out a certain amount of pressure, building up ult charge, threatening the enemy, things like that, but not going that far in, not going too aggressive, not even fishing for any kills right now. You're keeping yourself safe, making sure that you are unable to get punished while you're watching the battlefield, and you are just watching for mistakes that are going to be made by the enemy. If the enemy is too aggressive, enemy is pushing alone or out of position in any way, that is the opportunity that you wait for. A lot of times you're going to be sandbagging abilities for that opportunity, and you're specifically going to be waiting for that. You're not going too aggressively wasting your abilities trying to fish for something by yourself. You're waiting for the enemy to push in and the enemy to make a mistake. And I promise you, especially at many of the lower ranks, enemies are going to make mistakes all the time. People are going to push way too aggressive. Genji's going to end up in your backline with no abilities. A freaking Winston's going to jump in without his bubble. I mean, it happens over and over again, but a lot of times people just throw their abilities right off the bat. They don't sandbag them. They don't think about what the enemy team is doing, and they're always trying to make a play themselves. But the passive player who has his abilities and is ready to not only just back away from any impactful plays the enemy team is making, but re-engage upon them with their abilities that they save specifically to punish, that can be freaking phenomenal as a strategy, and some of you are going to find this strategy the easiest for you to get value with. Now, the last strategy is a little bit of a doozy one, but I think it's important for some of you because some of you just don't really like to play the game the regular way, and you're an outside-the-box thinker, so I have a separate category for this type of playstyle that I think everyone can incorporate a little bit into their own gameplay. Now, these are strategies that the enemy team would basically fold to just because they wouldn't think to play around it. Think about a strategy like spawn camping. An enemy Zen dies early, you as Tracer go all the way and you camp in a corner right outside of spawn, waiting for the enemy team to try to get back to spawn. You burst him by half health before he even realizes you're there, and it's just a free kill at that point. You could also wait and bait, purposely leaving out a duo bait partner, or basically just waiting around a corner, waiting for enemies to push into a space you know that they want to take, and getting a free cheeky kill and running away. You can do this on a lot of characters that can one-tap, characters like McCree or characters like Reaper, especially because it happens so fast in lower ranks. Enemies are not going to be able to punish you when they don't know what the freak happened out of nowhere. And then you can even go really balls deep with some strategies like the teleport wrap with things like Symmetra, and essentially the outside-the-box thinker really works around the preconceptions of the game. They understand how the game is supposed to be played, and they understand what generally the enemy team is going to be thinking about what they're doing on a certain character, but they use those preconceptions to actually think outside the box, try and abstract things that the enemy would never play around. Now, it's important to not try to just be outside the box all the time, because typically an outside the box strategy is not a consistent one, and it really relies on that unpredictability in order to be effective. But if you're too unpredictable predictable all the time, then the enemy is just going to be hyper cautious. They're going to be really prepared for you to try to do something cheeky like this. So it's something that you can whip out in the middle of the round to try to turn around a game that's not going so well, or to snowball a slight amount of momentum. But I think you need to be a little bit crazy to pull this off perfectly, but I know each and every one of you, part of the Game Loop community, definitely is. And smash the like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments down below. Send feed pics. I love your faces. See you next time.